Thank you very much. And they've come up with rather fantastic sort of summer's evening lighting here, which is making me feel it's a little closer to beer o'clock than I should be standing on the stage. But tomorrow's CCIO. And as I start this, as you heard in the introduction, this is not my first go round the game. A bit like, for those who watch The Simpsons, Troy McClure, you may remember me from such infomercials as the National Programme for IT. So a decade ago, I would have stood on stage to give you the talk about tomorrow's CCIO, and it might have sounded similar to the one I'm about to give. Now, a lot has changed, and I'll come on and explain some of that in detail. And I think, genuinely, the next 5 years are going to be really exciting in health and in the impact of digital technologies in health. And I appreciate that is not the first time anyone's given that message, but I'll come on to why I think that's true. This is no surprise to anybody. We are collectively an aging population. We are getting far more demanding of the NHS, and the treatment options and opportunities we have are better and clearer. In cancer, and genomics is just beginning to come on stream. So the combined load is significant. What we can't afford to do is maintain our existing processes. We need the NHS to start taking advantage of the digital revolution that every other industry has taken for granted, and to yield the kind of efficiency gains and benefits that the rest of the world takes for granted. For tomorrow's CCIO, that is not a digital conversation. I'll come on to it, but the technology bit, out here are thousands of us, hundreds of us, several vendors keen to sell you, quite rightly, systems to solve that problem. The culture change we need to make to take advantage of digital technology is much more profound. And I am not clear that the public at large or the clinical professions are ready for the types of changes that digital technology will bring. Our digital transformation journey, this is a beautifully rendered version for those who've been paying full attention to the placemat diagram that Matthew Swindell so loves and talked to you about this morning. Ben, no, none of this. Anything with sarcastic brackets around it cannot be quoted. But we are genuinely trying to empower the individual citizen to take greater control of their healthcare, to support clinicians to provide better care and reduce the burden on them from the recording and translation of care, to integrate services together, I'll come onto it in more detail, to help us gain greatest efficiency for the NHS itself across the piece, and lastly, research and development of some really interesting areas coming on for the future. We've done all right, actually, and it is lovely to be able to talk about progress. But the Local Health and Care Record Exemplar Programme will be launched within the next week. Apps, the apps library and the developer network is in operation now. 14 million people registered for online services, over 1.4 million, I think, currently using their live GP record. We're seeing the NHS app in trial at the moment, and that will be going live next year, giving people access to their GP records, their summary record, repeat prescriptions, booking of appointments. We've got some 43 trusts on track to be global digital exemplars or fast followers, showing us the best that the NHS can do. And as you've seen out on some of the stands, the next step for that is blueprinting, so any CIO and CCIO in the country can find a peer organization in order to take that IT stack whole, straight off a framework without having to go to Odoo and start again from scratch. Genomics, I've mentioned before, really interesting to see how that is going to play into healthcare. And we are moving to an era in which a full gene sequence will become a routine test for some conditions, not least for cancers. And the opportunity that potentially provides in terms of care individualized to the level of one is phenomenal. but we need to be able to move volumes of data around the service in a way we've never even dreamt of before. So what's the digital future look like? All leaders are digital leaders. Well, trite phrase, but really meaningful. You could not be a board-level exec in the financial services industry, in the retail industry, in any major player in this country without being completely digitally literate. And yet in many of our organization boards, should you produce the Excel spreadsheet of the financial numbers, everybody on that board would expect to understand them. If they have a serious incident and you do a root cause analysis of the clinical condition, everybody would expect to understand that. When they then talk about the digital strategy, the board, as a man and woman, turn, look at the CIO, and hope to God they're competent. And we have a job to do to make sure that our boards really understand that they are digital industries. They may not feel like it yet, and if you go into a hospital ward, it doesn't look like it yet, but they are digital industries. Keeping data safe, allowing it to move, ensuring it integrates with your neighbors is a critical part of the business. Real-time business intelligence on how your organization is performing, on the quality of care, the safety of the patients, the efficiency of the business, is a routine expectation. You and I can name organizations that are a very long way away from that at the moment. So the CCIO of the future is in the middle of this Venn diagram. I would like more people in the middle of this Venn diagram, please. We are going to have to breed them, train them, create them. Sorry to the guys at the back, I hadn't noticed the screen there, and all I could see was people kept turning and photographing something out of that window, and I was desperate to find out what it was. I don't know whether I'm relieved to see it's my slides or that someone isn't actually suicidal at the thought of the talk. So, feeling very sorry for the chap signing all of my noises off. In digital leadership, we need a cadre of people accessible to every NHS organisation who are operationally competent, understand how the organisation runs, understands it as a business, who are digitally literate and get everything we've been talking about here today, and who have a sufficient clinical background to deeply understand the meaning of this for patients and for their colleagues, for whom the change is the greatest component. We're doing that by trying to create a digital-ready workforce for the future. The NHS Digital Academy has 100 places live now, Rachel Dunscombe helping us with that, and another 200 places to go. I was having a fascinating conversation with HEE recently, who said, can you do a cohort for the digital leaders of the future, for junior doctors, for nurses who have a real interest in this, but are nowhere near the level you would need for the current academy of just at or pre-CCIO level. I think it's a brilliant idea, and we're going to explore it. We have a second piece of work to try and make our routine workforce digitally ready. I'll give you two pieces on that. One is, almost all of us will use digital devices as part of our leisure activity. Some of us, our spouses might comment, will never put the bloody things down, but we do. We spend our free time on the tablet, the phone, the computer, because we want to. We get to work and look at the screen with a sense of foreboding and dread, knowing that it is going to slow down processes that might otherwise be quicker, in the worst instances. I think we have a collective task to do to help make sure that time in front of the screen is, if not enjoyable, absolutely emotionally neutral. And that the staff who spend all that time in front of the screen understand the value of what they're doing for the rest of the system. So as an A&E consultant, I watch discharge summaries being done in a phenomenal hurry at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, without necessarily the due regard to the quality of the coded data that I would like if they had all the time in the world to undertake that. And I think we have a collective responsibility to try and get that right, and to help them as a workforce understand the importance there. I've talked about digital-ready boards already. The next piece, and the piece that I think is the challenge to the clinical community, is care not limited by organisational boundaries. So we are, as I say, in the process of launching the local health and care records programme, allowing interoperable and integrated records across care boundaries. There's a critical piece here about getting the right core elements of interoperability, of making sure, with meaning intact, information can flow between systems, and that the data potentially can sit at a layer separate from the system in which it was originally recorded. If we get that right, we will get an app ecosystem living on top of our infrastructure, allowing people a much easier time of using their clinical data. And I'm frankly looking forward to app developers being able to work at quite granular level to say, for ITU nursing staff, for my colleagues in A&E as prescribers, there's an app for that that can sit on top of your infrastructure. If you're a patient with diabetes, if you're a patient with renal disease, there's an app for that that sits on top of your health data and gives you understanding. So to give you the example, most of us, I suspect, in the room, if not all, have smartphones. Many of those will have the Trainline app on them at the moment. Yes? Much nodding in the room, some at the back still asleep. Basic just Trainline. The Trainline app charges you 30p for a ticket that you don't need to pay. There are plenty of other websites direct from the rail operators you could go to. You go to the Trainline because it's gorgeous as an app and gives you the most easier way of joining your journey up end to end. Where are the opportunities? I think the opportunities are huge. How do we enable that same concept of this data is available to anyone, they can understand their diabetes care, but we are going to help them manage it better, help them manage their medications better, enjoy better outcomes from their care as a product of our app. And you make it that good, we build the structure into the NHS that allows that to become a prescribable therapy. And I think that would be fantastic, all based on interoperable, standardized data. But the other piece is integrated data, integrated health information for health and for social care. And we have put a lot of effort at the moment into trying to digitize existing structures, and that is an appropriate, correct, necessary step. But after a little while, you begin to think that may be outdated. The current structure of care, your GP as a family doctor, a community system, a district general hospital, a tertiary referral hospital, a consultant-level ward round with a nurse in uniform and a series of acolytes trailing along behind me, is entirely recognizable to my great-aunt, sadly died last year at 102, as the 1948 model of care. And there is almost no other industry in which the 1948 model has survived. If we integrate care, we integrate the record, we can allow people to enjoy potentially seamless care for their health journey. One example I give you in Tower Hamlets from Sam Everington and partners down there is allowing renal specialist nurses and renal consultants to write directly into the general practice note based on conversations they've had with the patients by phone or by email. They don't need to go to outpatients. They have a chat about it, a comment goes into the notes, the patient gets advice, care carries on seamlessly. Are they under the GP? Are they under the renal team? From the patient's point of view, and from both of those teams' point of view, nobody cares. The care is seamless and integrated. And our current model, predicated by many, whose name is over the bed, have we written the transfer of care document correctly? Have we passed on control? Is simply outdated as a concept. Now, I don't think that's going to happen next year, but the question was, what does tomorrow's CCIO need to worry about? I put it to you, that is going to be the big challenge of the next decade, how we change the boundaries of care to make it seamless for the patients. The next one is patients looking after their own care. I assume that was a planned changeover rather than I just tired out. Sorry. I once managed to do a simultaneously translated talk in the Far East, and they kept having to switch the translator because I was speaking too fast and they couldn't keep up. Patients empowered to take control of their health, and we've talked this language a lot,
But in other aspects of our lives, we have taken control of whole areas of our lives that were previously controlled by professionals on our behalf. So you wind back to when I was a child, you had to get to the bank by 3:30 in order to get your money out, and it was at their discretion how much they gave you, frankly, depending on what they thought of the look of you. We have completely changed that industry. Once upon a time, you had to trust what the brochure told you about a hotel. Now you can find out what 200 other people who've stayed there thought of it and what photographs they took of that same organization. We, as doctors, are still the high priests of the NHS in that regard, and translating what we do into English, making it transparent to the citizen, allowing them an equal say in their care plan is one hell of a revolution. I think we can do it if we allow them full access to their records and allow them to co-produce everything that goes from there. Patients and clinicians together. There is good evidence that where you allow people to co-produce their care plan and to own it, they get better outcomes. They feel far more engaged in their care, and as a consequence, they get much better health outcomes. That's a free win for clinicians, and we should take it. We are ensuring that the nhs.uk website is one of the most go-to websites in the world for health advice, and absolutely trusted. It's now been completely re-platformed and makes it gorgeous and easy to use. Been there, done that. Well, looking at my 7-year-old going, that doesn't look right. Apps and wearables, we are moving into an environment in which the control over how and when people acquire their physiologic data moves out of clinical control and into the patient's control. And as I'm sure you are aware, there are devices now that can provide you from your smartphone with a staggering range of physiological observations that previously were controlled by the machines that were ours inside the hospital or the GP surgery, and are now absolutely out there. Your blood pressure, your pulse, your oxygen saturations, whether or not you're in atrial fibrillation, are freely available at minimal cost. How do we make sure that really useful data is incorporated appropriately in people's health records in a way that still allows us to spot the important changes, the trends that matter, and we are not simply swamped by data? How do we move to a model in which the HbA1c result doesn't go to the health professional, it goes to the patient armed with appropriate advice about it, and with a sensible opportunity to add everything else around it that matters? We are building an app library. My COPD is the only one that's now fully approved as an accredited therapy app and gets brilliant outcomes. But our aim here is to differentiate apps that are better than existing therapies, as good as existing therapies, and can be prescribed on the NHS, that can be recommended for patients to use as an alternative to whatever they're doing now, as well as apps that we might simply say are a really good idea. And I want the first of the medication apps to come on stream that help tell you everything you need to know about your medicine for you, not in general, rather than a pack insert that simply aims to scare you with every side effect anyone's ever thought of. Last little piece, it says here workforce planning. I think it's a bit wider than that. The picture, I'm sure some of you know, Amazon sends trucks out loaded with goods that haven't been ordered yet, because their AI algorithm knows what is likely to be ordered that day in that part of the world, and therefore loads the truck up and sends it out. In health, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. And we talk about AI as replacing doctors, replacing radiologists, etc. It might, but probably not in the next 5 years or so. For tomorrow's CCIO, the bit that matters is that whole supply chain management and workforce management, where AI has already scored terrific gains for other industries. And anyone who has ever looked at a large-scale, multidisciplinary clinical rota and thought there must be a better way of doing this, there is. It just hasn't made inroads into healthcare yet. It wasn't that controversial a point. That's going to make the next round of decision-making easier. How do we use insights to accurately predict demand? And any of you who've been through an A&E that perhaps wasn't ideally organized where after a little while, the junior doc or the specialist has gone, we're going to need to admit you or your mum, and then the whole hospital's gone, an admission. We'll need a bed. Somebody find a bed. We'll need to organise some tests. We better sort some tests. Somebody ring the radiologist because tests are needed. This is what we do. The number of patients passing through an A&E is entirely predictable, and the number by day of the week, by season of the year, by prevailing clinical conditions in that area is predictable. Do you know who first knows of a flu outbreak in your area of the country? Tesco's Club Card. They're first, okay? They've got a lovely little algorithm runs off the back of the Tesco's Club Card that spots point of sale of paracetamols and Lemsips and so on, and they track flu as it moves around the country faster than anyone else. We are barely scratching the surface in the NHS, and it's time to start allocating resources much more intelligently. So what is the world of tomorrow's CCIO? And hopefully I've got time for a question or two. Digital is fundamental to everything we are going to do in the next 5 years. We need to help end organisational boundaries as a barrier to care, not as a means of getting paid and organising ourselves or where we work, but as a barrier to seamless care. We need empowered patients connected with us and with their devices, and we need an improved supply chain in every aspect, workforce and supply chain, using the very best technology available. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Do you have questions from the floor?
Hi, thank you very much for a very informative talk. My name is Dr. Naila Siddiqui Kamal. I'm a gynecologist at Imperial College. I'm already converted, so my question is not going to be, exploring the needs and the place of digital solutions and disruptive technology. I'm just flagging up the other side of the coin, the practicability at the moment in the workplace. So A&E, as you say, ED as the new word is, we know, I work in a unit where we know that there are going to be around 300 patients in one day often, within the week, 250 to 300 average. Admission also predicting with artificial intelligence, you can tell that this is the number of patients that we'll need, but there are no beds. So the solution, your very sort of disruptive, latest edge solution fails because the practicality of implementation is not there.
Yes.
Wi-Fi is another thing, not there. So we talk about these things, but from the practical side of things, and the last point I'd make is the variability. So you may be working in a unit which is already, digital aware and is adopting, while as there are so many units where you don't get clinician engagement.
So yes, I take all of that, and as you might expect, if I announce what I do for a living to any group of clinicians, I will get a round of discussion about the quality of the individual IT they're asked to use and the fact that none of it will talk to the printers. And that's first off. And your comment about Wi-Fi is well received, though we are trying to roll out Wi-Fi across the entire primary and secondary care estate of the NHS. But yes, as an industry, we currently spend an average of less than 2% of our turnover on IT. In most industries that are as dependent on data as ours, that figure would be nearer 10%. And in financial services, it would be over 20%. 5 would be a huge advance on where we are. And because we have been through a really, really tough period for NHS funding, and quite understandably, everybody has focused hard on efficiency, clinical safety, and frontline facing stuff, which I completely get. I think we've stretched IT as thin as it can go in many organizations. We are using outdated hardware, old versions of software. WannaCry made that very, very clear. Prior to that, we were using XP at a level I don't think anywhere else in the world was using. We are right at the edge of this for some organizations. So the catch-up is significant. but so's the gain. And what we need, as I say, is a whole board-level decision-making, not just the clinical voice shouting, but a whole board-level decision that this is worth it, that the gain they make as an organization from having good IT, from higher productivity, from understanding what's going on in their organization in real time is worth it. And I hope we'll get there. There's one over here as well.
Hi, Simon. Nick Wood, CCIO at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals. One of the challenges I face is that every year I have to go and learn the different coloured fire extinguishers, how to pick up a box, how to,
wash your hands properly.
Exactly,
yeah.
But I don't have any annual mandatory training about using the essential clinical electronic systems that we have in our organisation.
Yes. So I am aware of this, and I've avoided doing the slight comedy turn on what the mandatory training for IT might look like. But I think there's some real validity in that point around the importance of understanding. So your and my hospital place huge weight on understanding the whole fire safety, and I'm not suggesting we shouldn't. But the incidence of fires in hospitals that pose a risk to patients is extraordinarily rare, and most of us may come across it once in our lifetime, if at all. The clinical consequences of complete failure to communicate someone's care with the next person who's looking after them, correct construction of a general practice letter, appropriate coding of an outpatient appointment, is real and immediate and affects tens, hundreds of thousands of patients a year. I'm not certain we've got our risk balance right here. And loathed as I would be to make mandatory training longer, there is something about ensuring all of our undergraduates in medicine, in nursing, everywhere, really have this at the core of their being, at the value of what they do. I'm going to keep talking until you tell me to stop, but there's another one here. Oh, no, there's one at the back.
Hello. Yeah. I'm Dave Karan. I'm an orthopedic consultant. Reason I'm here is because of my keen interest in using the technology to improve the quality and safety. However, when we go to the board or in a trust investment group who makes the decision about investment, always there is a question about where is the business plan which will give us the return on investment. Would you be able to share some tips on how to make a business plan which will be listened or heard or worth investing? Thank you.
So a question on how does one satisfy a board? There is a return on investment from IT, and I think that's really, really valid. It is something that many of us in the secondary care world are struggling with at the moment. And actually, worldwide right now, it's quite hard to write that case. Genuinely. One can borrow one of the well-known consultancy companies who will produce a magnificent number in the bottom right-hand box, if suitably asked, based on a series of staggering extrapolations about the place running on robots and there being nobody left. But in the real world, this is hard. And the further behind you are, back to the first question I was asked, the larger the number you actually need to invest to stand still. You're not going to get an ROI on updating all of your computers and making sure the software is the latest version. That's just business as usual. And if you haven't repaired your roof, you don't get a return on investment from stopping it leaking. You just have to do it. If your drains don't actually take the poo away, I was the program director for a physical build of an A&E department. This was a little bit touchy. I won't refer to the brown fountain in the way that some of our staff did, but it didn't go well. Then that's not a return on investment business case. You've got to do it. So some of what you're struggling with needs to be in that business as usual bracket. The second element of this is the GDE Fast Follower program. We need to harvest the best of what people have been able to do by getting to HIMSS level 7 and being able to share that with organizations in a way that says you don't have to write the whole business case from scratch. You can just have this with its pathways, with its interoperating elements of records, with the whole cloud-based stack, exactly as they're using it. Just go and have one of those. And we've now, as I say, we're going to be on 43 of them. You find a peer in there somewhere and you grab it. And I hope that will make the process easier for those of us on the ground trying to make this case. You're going to stop me, aren't you?
I am,
meanie?
Simon, sorry. That was absolutely fantastic and passionate as ever. Could everyone join me in a round of applause for Mr. Simon?